so much for choosing this session. I'm really honored. And a big thanks to the Google design team. I'm really psyched to attend the rest of the day. So my name is Erica, and I am a graphic artist, illustrator, and animation director. And a way more succinct way to say that is I'm a motion designer. I think about design in the context of time. I actually studied film, but in my last year of school, I turned towards motion because I really liked that it could balance abstraction, narrative, and function. Motion design also connected me back to a mutation of a career path that I had always wanted to pursue, but had abandoned in middle school. Growing up, I was totally obsessed with cartoons, drawing them, watching them constantly. And then recently, I've taken another turn towards visual and UX design for mobile. And this last summer, along with two friends, one of which is actually in the audience, Charlie, we released a mobile game called Specimen, which you can download if you have an iPhone. I'll be coming back to Specimen, but first I just want to establish why motion is really an asset to UI UX in the first place. I'm just curious, how many people here are designers? All right, any developers? Okay, all right, yeah, we got two. Any animators? Yes, all right, okay. So again, first let's talk about motion and why it's an asset to UI UX. From there, I'll talk about building Specimen and my journey as an animator to apply my skill set to the phone. Specifically, I'll expound on the shortcomings that we faced going from idea to prototype to final product. And lastly, I'll talk about why we should actively bring animators to the table, and what we can gain by sewing animation thinking directly into how we build software. So first, besides for there being endless number of articles on Medium that talk about animation and UI UX, why really should you care? Simply put, screens are built to change. A screen's greatest advantage is its flexibility, its ability to morph from one state to another. My personal hero, a man named Norman McLaren, and an experimental animator said, "Animation is not the art of drawings that move, but the art of movements that are drawn. What happens between each frame is much more important than what exists on each frame." So basically, what this means is that the in-between moments is where the magic happens, right? We're primed to deduce meaning between these two frames. This is where things come alive. Animation can supplement spoon feeding. It's a hint, it's a clue, it can transcend localization, it can clarify intention. So let's get super specific and look at 5 specific examples of how animation can actually improve experience. When it's unclear what a computer is doing, you're naturally going to be incredibly frustrated, right? So much of that discouragement can be allayed when you just have some insight into what the computer is thinking and know that this thing is actually working. Feedback allows us to connect to something otherwise impersonal. It allows us to connect to wires and plastic. Consider the humble variant of the blinking cursor, right? This is pretty old-fashioned, but it's actually a pretty critical step up. It's saying, I'm here, I'm waiting, I'm ready, type something. Just knowing that a computer is thinking can really prevent us from pulling our hair out or at least force quitting, right? We see this everywhere, but you would be pretty lost without it. In lieu of haptic or auditory feedback, animation can step in to help bridge the gap. This is in Instagram's camera, where you have this circular guide that helps you to intuitively know that you've locked focus. And then this loop, right? This loop makes me actively wonder what's being typed on the other end of the line, and I tend to pretty anxiously hang on. Hierarchy helps complex software feel graspable. Knowing what's most important, what I need to know right now, can alert us to something urgent or soothe us away from being overwhelmed. I know that this isn't necessarily the most popular animation, but when I'm surfing for cute dog GIFs, this is pretty handy. This says, it's like, all right, you got to get back to work. Your render's done. Here's a gentler way to say you've overlooked something that doesn't use language. I think we've probably all seen this shake in one form or another. If you can't navigate through an app, you're probably not going to get very far. Oops. Sorry about that. Go forward. With apps especially, there can be so much to pack into a really small screen. So explicitly connecting how we move through states helps us to stay oriented. There's a designer named Pascal de Silva who made this app called Keezy Drummer. Maybe some of you have it. He coined this term called contextual zooming. As you navigate from one section to another, where you go stays spatially connected from where you tapped. But if you have an iPhone, you've probably seen this before. The location of the app I select determines the direction of this animation. It really clarifies that, yes, this is exactly what you've selected, very intuitively. Just think about trying to skip through time like this without the animation cues that tell us that we're drilling in or pulling out. I mean, there's actually a ton of animation choreography that's happening across position and scale and opacity. And notice, this is really subtle, but notice how when you move in, there's a bounce, but as you move out, that bounce is absent. Animation can be used in a variety of ways to gently push you towards something. It can be a great way to put a novel way to put a certain feature on a strategic pedestal. I'd wager the most important interactions in Tumblr are posting content and liking those content, and Tumblr has added animation flourish to each. For this one, it's like, are you absolutely sure that you really want to call off the driver to cancel that ride? This press to cancel animation makes it all the more easy to change your mind. This is, I think, the reason why a lot of people use animation. Standing out, right? There are thousands, there are millions of apps on the App Store, right? You've got competition no matter what you're doing. Similarly, there are hundreds of cable channels vying for our attention now. Each use design and animation to shape the way we feel about the network on the whole. Here's an example of on-air packaging for IFC that I really like. This was done by a shop called Gretel in New York. I love that the bounces feel playfully abrupt and sharp, which really jives with their programming, like Portlandia. Similarly, the Reuters app balances a surfable experience with a more traditional lean-back TV watching feel. The high-end motion design around the interface is in perfect harmony with the motion design around the content, which is all completely dynamic. The animation also defines what makes this app's experience different from all the other news apps that exist on the store. You know, when I want to read the news, I go to the Times, but when I want to watch it, I go here. And I just looked to see if there was confirmation if anyone else was as excited about this app as I was, and I found this. Someone said, it feels like a leap forward in how we watch news on our mobile devices, and I'm personally very inclined to agree. But this can also be a lot simpler, right? Consider the action pull to refresh. It's like inserting a small little toy, but even better if you're encouraged to keep coming back for new content. Considered animation is a huge part of what makes an app feel polished, and I think the most important thing is that great animation, just like great design, can reflect back on your brand. But a word of warning, over-animation, especially in the case of wanting to stand out, can be abused. I think the trick is to balance exploration and also be honest about utility and purpose. It's definitely a fine line to walk. I was just looking at this the other day. This is my bank, which is totally vanilla, and it's really small, but I have no idea why they chose that sort of goofy bounce and have neglected the rest of the interface. So it's, yeah, completely at odds with how I think about my bank. OK, so let's get into Specimen. seeing animation used in UI UX felt like a personal opportunity to find out, okay, how can I get my skill set onto this screen? This was one of the biggest questions I had when I set out to make a game. And that game, as I mentioned, was called Specimen. But the journey actually starts with a friend of mine named Sal. Sal is the iOS lead at Paperless Post, which is also here in New York. In 2012, he came to me saying that he was interested in coding game logic, and that this was a way for him to get out of his comfort zone. And did I want to make a game? My point of view was that games often demand custom interfaces and custom interactions, and animation has a really specific value in games, right? These were some of the games that we were looking at in 2012 that we were really inspired by. So some of my favorite design from that year came from games. But we were both complete game-making novices. Neither of us had ever tried to make a game before. So we decided that we want to focus on an audience that at least we thought we knew, which was designers. So we laid down our first constraint, which was to make a game about color. While freelancing, I'd actually played one of these color games on the internet and was really surprised who excelled and who struggled. Even though I was a designer, embarrassingly, I was miserable. And that sort of fascinated me. I'm just curious, has anyone here played Specimen by any chance? Yeah, OK, a few, cool. So our first color game looked like this. The idea was that there is a cipher, and which are these circles, and you want to match the cipher's gradient with the background gradient. And we built a prototype, and we were totally excited, and then we found out that it was not fun to play at all. OK, so idea number 2. I designed another color game where you would choose from these boxes, and each time you got the color right, the boxes would multiply. But before we even got to the prototyping stage, we realized there wasn't just a perceptual limit, there was a finger surface area limit. I think I've actually seen a version of this crop up since then. Maybe you've played it on the web, but yeah, so we abandoned that idea. Stuck with color. The third idea I had was basically Specimen. I really wanted to get Sal excited about this one. I had sort of like a good feeling, so I was like, I'm going to mock up the gameplay as I saw it in my head to really try to entice him. That's like, OK, this is the one. This is the one that we should hit the gas on. And just to explain, in case you've never played, what if instead of those boxes, there were these cute, almost sentient blobs, where the object, super simply, was to just pick the blob that matched the background? We're calling those little organic dudes specimens. The game gets harder as the specimens become more similar to one another, and the clock ticks faster. And then in advanced levels, we introduce special pattern specimen, which help you to narrow down choices or eliminate options, or you can hold on to them for a big point bonus at the very end. But rewinding, Sal built a prototype, and this is what it looked like. So pretty basic. But I found that I'd play it involuntarily. I'd get on the subway, and I'd fire it up. Maybe more importantly, when we stick it in front of friends at parties, we found that people really didn't need a lot of explaining. They just sort of got it. And people also would have these physical reactions. They would sort of scrunch their face if they were wrong, or they'd like yelp audibly if they were right, which was indicative of the best advice that I got when we were making the game, which was, you can't fake fun. This came from some friends who make the games Dots and 2 Dots. So throughout the process, we really looked for those physical cues that you just couldn't fake. Up until this point, I had worked on Specimen really sporadically, and I wanted to make myself accountable to a community. So I used the prototype to apply to New Ink, which was in conjunction with the New Museum on Bowery. New Ink is meant to house creatives working on a new project, or a new idea, or a new business, or a new facet of their career. For me, joining New Ink really gave the project stakes to follow through, and maybe even more importantly, a deadline by which to do it. Though I had made motion mocks to entice Sal, we used animation to iterate throughout the whole process of making the game. You know, when you can point to something concrete, it's a lot easier to talk about what you're aiming to make and spot flaws before you even get to development. So many small questions can arise when you have this big gap where there can be so much interpretation. Spelling out how states transition from one to the next shortcut us to really critical conversations much, much quicker. One of those critical conversations was the personality of these blobs. I created these motion studies to help explain what the personality of these blobs could feel like. I naively thought, you know, computers are so great at creating generative vector blobs, but Sal quickly was like, you've just opened a door to a lot of interaction that you've not thought through at all. Luckily, making that behavior Bible made us realize that we needed someone else, and that's when we enlisted Charlie. Charlie was also working at New Ink, and he became a teammate soon after we got out of that prototyping stage. And working with Charlie was really a collaboration. It was like throwing a ball back and forth, where only by working together could we realize what was attainable and what looked great. Specimen was a capital S side project. So one of the most important things that I could do was to constantly ask what could be simplified and what could be cut. The specimen behavior was too important to let go. It really was these things that felt irresistible to touch and steered this app away from just being a sort of curious diagnostic. Journalist Mark Wilson wrote this after playing when the game came out. He said, "I feel a tightness in my chest that's at odds with this meditative set of animations, and this cognitive dissonance is, yes, fun. The brutality of the time nature of the game juxtaposed with the innocent personality of the blobs is, I think, one of the key parts of the app's success. Also, more simply, we really just needed to make something that looked fun. You know, if you'd be riding the subway, you'd lean over and think, like, oh, what's that? I want to download that when I get above ground." Another smaller place that we focused on animation was the splash menu. You know, you only get one first impression, and we wanted the first thing you see to feel custom and special and to create just a little bit of anticipation so you'd actually wait for the game to load. It's really simple, but a little bit of brand surprisingly goes a long way. When we released, we were totally psyched when Apple featured us as the best new game, and we actually ended up talking with someone at Apple, and the first thing that they said was like, oh yeah, I was really taken in by that splash menu. So again, a little bit of brand, long way. Using After Effects to mock up gameplay was a huge, huge asset to Specimen's process, but it was also insanely frustrating to have none of my work be applicable to code. You know, everything had to be rebuilt. I realized, through making Specimen, I realized that there's a really huge chasm that exists between what I could do in my animated prototypes and what we could actually do in an app. To continue with the nature photography metaphors, it was sort of like summiting a hill only to then see the mountain in front of you and then realize that the pickaxe that you've lugged all along really was not going to be of much help. Even though crafting animation is a really visual process, it tends to be the domain of the developer. One of the most important things that I think about as a motion designer is interpolation. And interpolation, simply put, describes how an object gets from start to destination. By default, a computer will interpolate things linearly. This will totally get us from point A to point B, but for me, it just reeks of computer, right? For me, seeing this is like a total snooze fest. Many frameworks like SceneKit or SpriteKit or Core Animation equip developers to apply a library of predefined functions that make applying slightly better animation a little bit easier, namely an ease out or an ease in or a spring. As an After Effects animator, I also have a default way of putting in an ease in or an ease out. But to be honest, just doing this is the junior animators giveaway. What really separates the girls from the women is the curve editor. As a motion designer, I spend so much time tweaking these curves to create nuance. Really, the heart of what I do as an animator exists here. Admittedly, it can take a little bit of time to get used to, but consider this as the alternative. It's by no means impossible to understand this. It's just harder for me as a designer to interact with it. Since we already have a visual way to express this, I'm really curious what would happen if we just didn't obfuscate it, if we used the visual language that we already have. You know, I'd often rifle through the code line by line and make small little changes to get design up to spec. I know that there's a lot of designers in here. Maybe you'd sort of do the same thing. You know, for me, I'd see these glaring visual glitches that I was happy to spend time laboring over, and that meant, if that meant going into the code, okay, I was going to go on that adventure. But I found that making any really serious adjustments, any low-level adjustments to the animation was like 20 times more opaque than just doing simple things like this. One key place we focused on the interpolation in Specimen was the way that these modals animate on screen. We explicitly never say fail in the game. Instead, when you die, the way that these modals snap in sort of feel like you've been speeding and you've had to hit the brakes. This might seem sort of like not that much, but to demonstrate a point, here's a side-by-side. The left is what a standard spring looks like, and if you play several consecutive games, I think that this animation is really going to wear on you. The goofy bounce, sorry, the left is basically the lowest hanging fruit for a developer and where most animation starts and ends. And then taking another look at Reuters, when I see this, I can instantly tell that, that these aren't the same library animation curves that I've seen over and over again. And it didn't surprise me to learn that one of the developers had a really advanced background in motion design. Building Specimen made me realize why animation tends to feel default. Boilerplate motion tends to be too slow or comically springy. It's not that these libraries are inherently bad. There are a lot, like Facebook Pop, that are totally fantastic. It's just that we lean too heavily on a one-size-fits-all approach to just take care of animation for us. Most frameworks lack any kind of visual tool that would just encourage tweaking or aid us to improve. But to be honest, I'm really sympathetic. Engineers tend to have huge problems like new features or squashing huge bugs, and ideally, I would love to sweat these details on behalf of developers. The phones we carry in our pockets are powerful, but they have really what I thought were surprising limits, and we hit them really quickly. How many people here know what a sprite sheet is? Yeah, okay, great. So you guys know what this is. You can easily play it back. It's sort of optimized for the phone. It's really great for small, short elements, but, and if I can render out animation, it means I can do a lot of heavy lifting for my collaborators. But sprite sheets can also be unseemly Band-Aids. Have you guys hit this before? Have you tried to do bigger sprites? If the animations are too big or too long, they stutter and your whole app suffers. Their raster format means that they also don't scale conveniently to screens of all sizes, and those sizes are just multiplying, it seems, day by day. After Effects is a wonderfully robust tool to make amazing animations. It's a really great place to dream about interactions, but I was ultimately hindered because the software blinded me to the constraints. Learning this lesson made me long to animate in a way that was native to the code that we were building. I also wasted a lot of time not working within the context of the device. I continually underestimated my ability to see what I was doing because the screen I was animating on had no mirrored connection to the screen I was animating for. This was sort of my cumbersome process. You know, I would animate something in After Effects, I'd render it out, I'd often make it into a sprite, I'd stuff it into the code, I'd build, I'd realize it was totally wrong, and I'd start all over again. I think if we can close this gap, we can make, we'll see a lot more refined work. And it'll also be a lot less painful. But OK, so the good news is many of my pain points are being addressed, especially that last point about mirroring. I'm psyched that there's this new rash of tools that are out, and many of which are being discussed today at SPAN. Game engines are more mature, and in many ways, I wish we'd used Unity to make Specimen. But if you're trying to just make an app and do animation in that app, that might be choosing a cleaver when all you really need is a butter knife. As an animator, as I look at the tools that are being made today, I can't help but to think of COSA, which is what After Effects was in 1992. You know, we're at a 1.0 when we're sort of deciding what the key paradigms are and how they'll evolve in the next 10 years. You know, in COSA, there was like, you had this concept of a timeline. You could do one or two things, but it was really, really minimal. I think we're really on the verge of something great in interactive animation, but we definitely have a long way to go. I previously mentioned that growing up, I really wanted to be an animator. I could not have been more passionate about drawing, but the idea of making thousands of precise illustrations rattled me. And like I said, in middle school, I gave up that career path. In college, when I saw After Effects and the breed of animation that it spawned, which was motion design, my interest was reignited. You know, the tool didn't make me want to be an animator, but it convinced me that I could be an animator. And I think that's a really powerful concept. And I think about this potential when it comes to the tools that are being built now. You know, the relationship between what the work is and how we make the work is inherently symbiotic. By enticing animators, we'll widen the amount of people who are helping to shape this field. And all the better if we all, as designers and developers, think more about design in the context of time, if our tools aid us to do that. A more diversely skilled Makerbase, I think, will benefit us all as users. I don't think we need more robust animation tools to make the hamburger menu more charming. I think we need great animation tools to see what's beyond the hamburger menu. If we make custom animation easier and faster and fun to both design and implement, I think we stand to discover new ways to interact with the ecosystem, ever-evolving ecosystem of technology around us. And maybe we'll suffer through a phase of really bad animation, but I think it's really worth equipping ourselves to know what's beyond. My bet is that animation will be an ever more critical component of future interfaces. Not just the mobile interface or the desktop, but increasingly as everything becomes a screen, or as everything incorporates a screen. But beyond the screens we have now, I think we need powerful, visual, flexible animation tools to set the stage for the interfaces yet to come, right? For when we get beyond glass rectangles, for the cases we're just starting to imagine, or can't yet imagine. Thanks.